Military Medicine and WarDocs present a Ready Medical Force Special Collection. We speak with the authors of recently accepted journal articles addressing the key readiness issues in operational medicine and discuss the importance of their findings. Welcome to WarDocs, the Military Medicine Podcast. This show brings you a first-hand, behind-the-scenes look into the mission, unique opportunities, and deployed experiences of the entire military healthcare team. From state-of-the-art hospitals in the United States to the most austere environments across the globe, WarDocs has you covered.
Welcome to WarDocs. I'm your host, Major General Retired Jeff Clark, and today's guest is Dr. John Quinn. Dr. Quinn is the lead author on an AMSA's military medicine article entitled Prehospital Lessons from the War in Ukraine, Damage Control Resuscitation and Surgery Experience from Point of Injury to Role 2. John, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, General. I truly appreciate the time, and it's an honor to be on WarDocs.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And John, let's start by having you tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to be involved in supporting the war in Ukraine, and what you and your team are doing now.
Absolutely. So I am a licensed paramedic and emergency medicine physician. I was first introduced to Ukraine at a military level. Basically, in 2014, I was invited to do a battlefield assessment by one of our colleagues, Medic Patrick C. Great opportunity, and really started to engage and identify some of the gaps and challenges. Some things worked, some things did not. There were a lot of reforms that took place from 2014 until COVID 2020. And then I was brought on as the chief medical officer at the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, special monitoring mission to Ukraine, so the OSCE SMM in Ukraine. And I was able to get even a deeper, closer look at some of the health security challenges, as well as some of the military medical challenges at the time, the anti-terrorist operation, with the forward line of troops, specifically fighting the Russians before whole-scale invasion. And then prior to the whole-scale invasion, with the buildup of Russian military, I was able to join the Migrant Offshore Aid Station as their chief medical officer and medical director to be able to start and initiate a medical evacuation at point of injury and peri-point of injury and Role 1 to Role 2 levels of care. As well as a lot of other medical advocacy work. So it's been a very long process, but really the Russian whole-scale invasion was where I was able to engage and see firsthand exactly the difference between what was the 2014 to 2022 operation, where it was a completely different evolution of warfare until large-scale combat operations began with Russia's whole-scale invasion of Ukraine.
John, thank you for that. That's fascinating. It's amazing what you've been able to do, and we all greatly appreciate what you're doing. So tell us a little bit about your team of co-authors and why you decided to put together this article for military medicine.
Absolutely. So the reason it was put together is really to be a bit of a playbook. These are anecdotal lessons learned and experiences. This is what we saw on the front lines. And if you look at the co-authors, it is just a hodgepodge of colleagues. We have expert traumatology surgeons. We have colleagues that I worked with at OSCE. We have colleagues and paramedics that I've worked with in the back of trucks at the forward line. And we also have academics working in different areas of the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Defense, now the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the AFU, and everything in between. And the reason academic collegiate medicine is it takes the whole gambit. So you need your paramedics that are doing stuff. You need your academic physicians and surgeons that are doing stuff, but also looking at things at 30 and 40 and 50,000 feet. And you also need people that are really linking it, the glue together. I think it's really important to also include as many Ukrainian academics and rising stars as possible. It's very challenging, very difficult to publish and to really put things down and put your notes down in a second or third language. And so if you can support that and get some of their anecdotal feeds and get some of their information, take it with your own analysis, take it with your own clinical experience and put it forward, it's a great opportunity to really promote the specialty. So the co-authors, as you can see, all of their affiliations that are there, it's an excellent bunch of colleagues, and we're still doing a lot of research to this very day with several of them. I saw them in the field last week, some of them, and we stay engaged, and we really try to push the best practice standard, not only for Ukraine but for all of NATO and NATO partners, to be able to really get at point of injury, get that warfighter what they need when they need it, at the right place and the right time.
Healthcare is truly a team sport. Combat casualty care is absolutely a team sport. So that you've put that many perspectives on what you're doing and collated that into an article is outstanding. So summarize your methodology in writing what you refer to as a descriptive commentary.
Absolutely. So NATO has excellent terminology for lessons learned. And one of the experts for lessons learned from European Command is one of our co-authors, retired. It's very difficult. It's very important to be able to put all of that process into play, to use the right lexicon, to use the right terminology, as it relates to experiences versus lessons learned, lessons shared, as it relates specifically to NATO methodology. The descriptive aspect of this is indeed anecdotal experiences that we had in the field. So running around in a 4x4 truck with patients in the back, running around in ambulances that are unarmored, running around in ambulances that are armored, picking up patients under a tree, picking up patients at a fancy basement, roll 1, roll 2, roll 1 plus, and everything in between. Being able to bring all of that together is really descriptive. I think it's very important to comment that due to operational security concerns, we can't run around and say the number of patients, right? Okay, this clinic has this many patients per day, per week, per month. It's absolutely terrible for operational security. So it's very difficult. It's very challenging to epidemiologically approach some of these problems that exist, and looking at the morbidity and the mortality and saying, okay, this is the actual number, and this is potentially why. We can't really do that, but we can describe what we see, and we can say, okay, well, anecdotally, meaning my experience and my experience alone, we were able to unpack this, see this, and you bring in some co-authors, you bring and say, actually, we had it a little bit different, or actually, we had it the exact same for 9 months of warfighting, and be able to put that together and craft it really to be able to offer a very practical playbook and say, listen, these are some things we have to be thinking about. We have to be thinking about it in the back of the truck. We have to be thinking about it on patrol, when in the back of a rucksack and back in your backpack. But you also, if you're at 40, 50,000 feet and you're a policy decision maker within military medicine paradigms, or if you're in NATO, if you're in European Command, if you're in the security assistance group for Ukraine, you may be able to take some of these lessons and say, I wonder if these are issues that we can actually approach with projects and programming. And some of them already are being addressed, and some of them may have even been almost fixed. But being able to describe the problem, really just to lay it out there, I think and really boil it down was the approach. And that's why it's descriptive in nature, and it doesn't involve tables of data that unpack different types of wounding patterns and different types of morbidity associated with the evolution of warfare with weapon systems that Russia is constantly introducing on the battlefield to terrible effect.
Yeah, John, thank you for that. That's a wonderful summary, and it makes a tremendous amount of sense. On the second page of your article, there's an outstanding, what you refer to as a graphical abstract, which is a great term, by the way, which summarizes your 10 pre-hospital lessons learned from the war in Ukraine. Could you walk us through each of those? Take about a minute or so to take us through each of those 10 lessons learned.
Absolutely. I mean, number one, in your paramedic, in your EMT school, in your paramedic school, scene safety. Scene safety is different with COIN operations, with counterinsurgency operations in Iraq that I experienced. Going out with a plate carrier and some glasses and some hard boots are completely inadequate. The operational security, the scene safety is severe. The electronic warfare is massive. You are an absolute target. Russia are targeting specifically medical workers, international medical workers, ambulances, medical vehicles, and medical locations. That is totally different than what we're used to in COIN operations. All of these weapon systems are firing by design. So these Grad rocket weapon systems are firing out of a Grad rocket truck. All of these other weapon systems, the S-300s, the Shahids, all of the weapon systems are doing exactly what they're meant to do. There's some issues and difficulties with Russian weapon systems, certainly, but In coin operations, they would take 155s and make an IED or a VBED, right? And that's a different type of safety approach, a different type of scene safety than being an absolute target on a wide open battlefield the size of Texas, 2,000 kilometers long. So it's a different approach. The PPE, the personal protective equipment that are used, may need to be more. You need to have more of it. Also, your operational security of how you engage with local partner forces, and how you engage with them, and how you communicate with them, how you communicate locations. All of that is different than in coin operations. Also, I think it's very important, to really think about triage and difficult decisions. I think something that the paradigm of tactical combat casualty care, as well as the whole DHA deployed medicine, which is a brilliant resource. I love it. I think everyone needs to download it immediately. And its mirrored website, which is the Ukrainian version, tccc.org.ua. It's an excellent resource on my volunteers doing the Lord's work, so to speak, of translating all of these clinical practice guidelines. They may have to start thinking about orienting how are we going to make these challenging clinical decisions if we don't have a experienced senior clinical decision maker. It's very difficult to make triage decisions based on having a few months or maybe a few years of clinical training, saying, well, listen, we have 143 patients and we can really only medevac 5 of them out for the next 18 to 24 hours. I mean, that is a very challenging decision to push down onto someone that may only have a few months or a few years of clinical experience or clinical training. So I think it's very difficult. The triage, the clinical decision making is very challenging in large scale combat operations. There's absolute massive patient volume. It's very challenging to deal with that. I think the aspect of tourniquets, my own practice within tourniquets, really putting on a preventative tourniquet. So being able to say, okay, I have a wound that does not require a tourniquet, and I'm going to use a pressure dressing, but I also need to put on a tourniquet above, not swing the windlass, not stop blood flow of any kind, but I'm going to be in the back of a truck and I have a lot of gear on. Patient has a lot of gear on. The other guy has a lot of gear on. If I need to actually do this, if all of a sudden by bouncing around for 7.5 hours on uneven ground on a road during a casevac or during a medevac, I may start bleeding. Bleeding may erupt because of that, even though the wound did not require it. Secondly, within tourniquets, it's very important to know when to put a tourniquet on. Self-aid, buddy aid, care under fire, put a tourniquet on. Absolutely. No one has a clue what's happening. But you have to have that 20 to 30 minute mark of saying, okay, tourniquet is on. We need to assess this. So it's just as important as saying, now this may not require a tourniquet. Let's leave the tourniquet in place, but we're gonna convert that to a pressure dressing. And we're going to do that appropriately and properly in keeping with TCCC protocols. That is absolutely fundamental. And that's been trained. It's available in Ukrainian. It's available in English. It's been available for quite some time, the conversion. But within tourniquets, being able to say, I need to put this tourniquet on, or I don't have to put a tourniquet on, or I can convert and downgrade. These are really important clinical skills that in large scale combat operations equal the difference of morbidity and warfighting and really force lethality, as it relates to amputations and other sequelae relating to inappropriate tourniquet use or just appropriate tourniquet use, care under fire. Everyone understands this is very challenging, very stressful, but we have to get that patient to a provider that can assess that properly. And we can't wait 9 hours to do that. That's not acceptable, right? We have to have that training to be able to appropriately address it. Pain management is a big one. I will say that I saw a lot of patients that had inadequate pain management. There is something that is readily available online, readily available in Ukraine, nalbuphine, which is an opiate agonist antagonist. So if you give someone nalbuphine, it's horrible. It's a terrible medicine. It's ineffective. It's not that good. It makes people have a headache. It makes them nauseous. They vomit quite a bit. So you have to have the really have the antiemetic, like ondansetron, etc. But once you use it, you're spinning around agonist, antagonist in the blood for 24, 48. So even if you give that medicine right off the bat, again, not the best drug. Ketamine is excellent. Fentanyl is excellent, etc. in keeping with TCCC protocols and standards. But if you're spinning around an agonist, antagonist, And now you get the patient to the appropriate place. Now you have an anesthesiologist and you're going to intubate them and you've got fentanyl. You still have agonist antagonists running around. So all of that fentanyl that you're putting in is actually, it's going to be less effective. And you may not have a good TCCC card to have all of the information shift from point of injury care to that anesthesiologist. So that anesthesiologist may say, look, this is fine. This is the amount of fentanyl I should be giving. And the patient's heart rate goes up and they're experiencing pain and they show signs of agitation. But it may be because they've received that agonist antagonist, which is absolutely a challenge. So, and also having adequate access to ketamine and to fentanyl is challenging in country. It is very challenging. Transport and mobilization is something that I think everyone knows. Everyone knows this from paramedic work and from EMT and pre-hospital stuff. But it's very important to really focus on that with training. Being able to take the training and say, listen, this is how you can do it ad hoc. This is how you can do makeshift stuff in the prolonged field care, prolonged casualty care process. But really, everyone needs to have adequate access to that level of training. And really broke apart lesson number 7 as it relates to what we're going to be doing for hypothermia and blood. I will tell you right now, large scale combat operations require a disproportionate amount of universal donor blood, of low titer OHO blood, and of blood products. A disproportionate amount. We need to have all of the clinical governance in place so that we can have non-providers give blood and blood products in the pre-hospital space. That has to be absolutely greenlit. We have to have a seemingly unlimited supply of universal donor blood and or low titer O. Very challenging to make. Logistically, it's very challenging. It goes bad in 30 days. It may go bad in 25 days by the time you physically get it to the right spot. That is really challenging logistically. But without adequate supplies of blood, you will see a precipitous morbidity and mortality associated without having that. So I think blood is really important to focus on. There's a lot of research that's coming out specifically for Ukraine. I do want to comment about blood in coin operations. When you have a small team of people doing a walking blood bank, makes perfect sense. You may have one casualty in 6 months. You may have one casualty every 6 weeks. If you have walking donor, it works. If you have large scale combat operations and you have 50 patients in a 24-hour period, you may have 125 patients in a 24-hour period. Walking donors is absolutely inadequate, and it's an academic concept. Additionally, antibiotics. I think this is probably one of the most important, and it's not as interesting or as sexy as blood and tourniquets and things, but antimicrobial resistance and antibiotics. Everyone understands from deployed medicine, from TCCC, we need to get antibiotics on board as soon as possible. We need to do that. We need to really mitigate that sepsis. We may be sitting in the field for 36 hours. We're going to have to keep the wound clean. We're going to have to get antibiotics. We're going to have to repeat antibiotics, but it has to be done through a antimicrobial guidance system to include biogram data. So running around to roll 1s and roll 2s and figuring out what organisms are there and what they're resistant to. When you start giving non-providers antibiotics and you say, well, antibiotics are really important, and they say, okay, well, 500 milligrams is the starting dose for this antibiotic, for example, IM or IV. That really quickly turns into, well, it's a really dirty wound. I should give him a gram. You know what? 6 months later, I should definitely give him 2 grams. Yeah, I heard they're doing 2 grams over here. Last run in the field in July, they were giving 4 grams of ceftriaxone at stabilization points. Now, not all stabilization points. Ukraine is not a homogeneous structure. It's not a homogeneous zone, but that is because of the inflation of dosing and not following clinical practice guidelines. Ukraine has enacted, rightfully so, an antimicrobial guidance structure, not necessarily entirely based on biogram data, but based on some level of data at tertiary care centers. And that's very helpful. So antibiotics are very important, but there's a problem in Ukraine specifically with antimicrobial resistance. And that needs to be addressed. If you're going to be having an antibiotic that's going to be given every 12 or 18 hours, you really need to be smart about the type of antibiotic that is, whether or not you're going to be giving it IV, IM, or in tablet form. Also, there's a lot of elderly warfighters. There's a lot of young patients that you may have to deal with. This is not just 18 to 35-year-old males of warfighting age. In fact, a lot of data that is in open source, you may be looking at patients with an average in their mid-30s. You have a lot of warfighters that are in their late 50s and early 60s. They may be taking several medications for non-communicable disease, for everything from diabetes to hypertension. And you have to think about how that affects the physiology of the trauma patient. You're looking at the patient, you're looking at the numbers, you're looking at the mechanism of injury. You're saying something doesn't add up. Why are we sitting like this? Why is the heart rate, did we not lose that much blood? Are we not in stage 3 shock? Well, they may be taking beta blockade. They may have other medications that may impact and they may not be able to tell you that. So it's very important to really consider all the age groups and really how that affects. Also, if you got pediatric patients, can you intubate a pediatric patient? Do you have the appropriate equipment to do that? Someone may bring a baby to the roll 1, roll 2. You need to be able to address that, and you need to be able to do that adequately. And finally, the most boring, the most important, even more important than antibiotics, is clinical governance. When you're a paramedic, you operate under a physician. When you're a physician, you operate under your own license. And when you're dealing with clinical governance in the field, there is an over-reliance in 2024 on non-governmental organizations, NGOs, providing direct clinical care at point of injury, providing CASEVAC to roll 1s, providing roll 1 level of care, training, support, medical logistics, and roll 2, and so on. Throughout the entire continuum of care, we're seeing an over-reliance on NGOs, and they may not meet the clinical governance standards that are required. They may exceed some of them, but it's very difficult if there is not a consortium of AFU associated organizations saying, listen, that we're gonna look at this. We're gonna say, okay, you're able to practice at this level, or you're not able to practice at this level. And I think it's very important to really focus on clinical governance. It's very easy to say, look, are you a shooter? Are you a medic? Now we're going to put you into a box. You may be a shooter medic, but you have to have clinical governance to shoot, and you have to have clinical governance to provide medicine. So I think it's very important that to really emphasize and focus on that for physicians, for paramedics, for both providers as well as non-providers.
Yeah, John, that's an excellent summary. You went through a whole lot of material in a very short period of time and outlined it very well. Again, I strongly encourage everyone to read your article, to take the time to go through that in more detail, but thank you for laying that out. And so if you could come up with 2 or 3 from those lessons learned, 2 or 3 top things that you think we ought to think about, focus on, training, equipment, supplies, whatever it happens to be, what are your top 3 things that we ought to think about, policy, et cetera?
It's blood, it's training and clinical decision making, and it's data. So we need to have an unlimited supply of low titer O. We need to have a universal donor, just unlimited supply. You need to be able to punch that to the line. You may not know where the enemy will be striking. You may not know or have anticipated medical planning to associate where you need it. So you need to have it everywhere. And you need to have a really slick logistical system. I was speaking with a colleague previously. Nova Poshta in Ukraine specifically is their mail service, and it's this amazing logistical service. Everyone relies on it. It's Amazon times 10 for Ukraine, and you could imagine the logistical requirements of getting blood through cold chain. But B, also saying, okay, listen, all these units need to be wasted. These units can't be used. They've expired. That's fine. They've expired. We now need to waste it properly and appropriately. We're not going to dump it down the sink, right? We need to do this properly because we have tens of thousands of units in a year that are going out to different locations. So blood. Number 2 is training and being able to better understand what resource restrictions will mean for decision making. And we need to be able to give a combat medic corpsman. We need to be able to give an all service member. We need to be able to give a combat paramedic provider tools that are clearly spelled out with no ambiguity. This is the way decision making, you're going to have to go through this decision making tree when it comes to making life or death decisions for dozens and tens of warfighters. And that triage process is challenging. It's normally left to the most senior provider. That's difficult when you have 125 patients. You can't physically assess 125 patients. And so whether or not we use AI or whether AI systems help aid and support that process. With the evolution of electronic warfare, it's going to be difficult to use a lot of technology, to leverage that technology. We have to be able to go out there with all of that technology and use it, and it's great and it's fantastic. But we also need to be ready to say, listen, all the net is down. It's over. It's finished. We have nothing. We have strict light discipline. We have strict EM discipline. We got the tools in our bags, and that's it. We have to be able to make decisions. It's very difficult to do that as a junior provider dealing with several patients. And then number three, so the joint trauma system used to be joint trauma registry, right? Joint trauma system is the coolest, most amazing thing in the world.
It truly is.
And it is amazing. And
Yes.
Colonel Jennifer Gurney is a brilliant leader, and she provides excellent leadership for that process. And we are going to fail, and we are going to be set up to learn all of these lessons and experiences again if we do not capture these data. If we do not capture these data points and all of these tens of thousands that are falling as casualties, if we are not capturing and squeezing and wringing out every last data point to better hone in our systems, potentially adjust TCCC and potentially not. Maybe it'll reinforce a lot of TCCC guidance. Maybe it'll reinforce a lot of clinical practice guidance, and maybe some of it will need adjustments. Also thinking about the different levels of resource when you have good, better, best, and you're thinking, well, what do I need to do in this scenario from a clinical practice guideline standpoint when I don't have any other resources? So those are the three main sections that I think they're really overarching themes that are going to be challenging for us and for NATO for the next decade.
Yeah, John, thanks for that. Your team's lessons learned again are just absolutely remarkable. They're foundational, and everybody in military medicine should read the article you and your team put together, because it's so straight up and for preparing us for the next conflict. So, as we close, any final comments for our audience as we wrap up?
I'd like to say thank you for letting me share my experience. I truly appreciate the opportunity. I think it's an honor to be on WarDocs. I think colleagues are fighting the good fight, and I also would like to say for all of the fallen in Ukraine and elsewhere on the battlefield, we can't let their deaths go without us learning, and we need to help really take all of that information on and be able to promote best practices, learn from these mistakes, and not let them die in vain. And we need to be able to support what we can, for Ukraine, our partner force, but also learn from this so that we can reduce preventable morbidity, mortality, and most importantly, support the lethality of our forces through good medicine. And I think that's the biggest take home. So I just would like to close with that.
John, thank you. I think you just summarized for us a profession. Profession basically does the best they can to be as good as they can be, and they take lessons learned as an opportunity to continue to get better within the privilege of doing things like what you and your team are doing, and it's greatly appreciated. Again, our WarDocs guest has been Dr. John Quinn. His outstanding article that's published in AMSUS Military Medicine is Prehospital Lessons from the War in Ukraine, Damage Control Resuscitation and Surgery Experiences from Point of Injury to Role 2. This great article is published in AMSUS Military Medicine. And those of you who are listening, watching, that are already AMSUS members, you already have access to this great article and so many others in military medicine. If you're not a member of AMSUS, I encourage you to join today so you can get access to things like John's article. Dr. Quinn, I thank you and your team. We thank you for your service in Ukraine and for taking the time and effort to publish this important information in military medicine. And we thank you for joining us on WarDocs, the Military Medicine Podcast.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
John, thank you, and God bless. Thanks for what you do.
God bless. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to WarDocs. We sure hope you enjoyed it. WarDocs is a nonprofit organization supported by donations from listeners like you. Please follow and subscribe to our show on whatever platform you consume your podcasts, and rate and review this episode, and share the show with your contacts on social media. Find out more information about our show, our guests, and how to become a member of Team WarDocs on WarDocsPodcast.com. Thank you for your support. If you like war stories and medical drama, WarDocs has you covered. Spread the word.